Hephaestus. The god of smithing and the son of Zeus and Hera, Hephaestus would have a difficult start to life. He was born lame, and so his mother Hera, after seeing the deformity, decided to throw him off Olympus into the sea to drown. Surviving the fall, Hephaestus would later return to the home of the gods and take his revenge, crafting a golden throne for Hera that would not allow her to stand back up once she sat upon it. It would only be through the intervention of Zeus that Hera would escape, with the king of the gods securing her release in exchange for gifting Hephaestus the goddess Aphrodite, the most beautiful Olympian, as his wife. Hephaestus would become a great inventor and fashioned many of the palaces on Olympus, as well as the equipment of the gods, with Athena's breastplate, Hermes' winged helmet and sandals, as well as Helios' chariot, all being crafted in his legendary forge. Some of his most famous work would be the bow and arrow of Eros, as well as the magnificent armor and shield of Achilles, with Hephaestus's creations aiding the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. To the Romans, he was known as Vulcan, the god of fire, who would forge his creations from a workshop beneath Sicily's Mount Etna, with it being said that the smoke and lava emitted by the volcano came from Vulcan's great forge beneath the surface. Ares. Ares, the god of war, delighted in battle and took pleasure in the slaughter of men and the sacking of towns. He was hated by mortals and gods alike, as he represented unrestrained rage, cruelty, and bloodshed, with the gods playing tricks on him for their own amusement. Ares had a long-term affair with Aphrodite, the wife of Hephaestus, with the two sleeping together whenever her husband was away. When Hephaestus found out, he was furious and decided to forge an invisible net to hang over his bed. When Ares came to lie with Aphrodite again, the two would be trapped naked beneath the net, unable to move, with all the gods of Olympus called out to sea. Laughter would ring out throughout the heavens, with the humiliation only coming to an end when Poseidon took pity and decided to set them free. Eos and Tithonus. But Aphrodite was not the only lover of Ares, with him also having an affair with Eos, the goddess of the dawn, who would rise through the sky each morning to clear the path for her brother Helios, the sun, so that he could make his daily journey across the earth. But upon finding out about the affair, Aphrodite would jealously put a curse upon Eos, causing her to have an uncontrollable lust for the young mortal men of the world. And so, one day, just as the morning hours were coming to an end, Eos would look down upon the earth, with her gaze settling upon the great city of Troy. For in the city was a young Trojan prince named Tithonus, so handsome that Eos was unable to look away. Descending to earth, Eos would introduce herself to the prince, with the two soon falling in love. At the end of each morning, when her duties were complete, Eos would travel down to Troy and meet with her beloved prince. But the more she grew to love him, the more she could not bear the thought of losing him to old age or war, to starvation or disease, or any of the other terrible ways mortal lives come to an abrupt end. And so, on her return to Mount Olympus, Eos would visit Zeus, begging him to make Tithonus immortal, a request he was happy to grant. But Eos had made one fatal mistake, as she had not asked for Tithonus to be given eternal youth. The two would live happily at first, but as the years went on and gray hairs began to appear on the prince's head, he would begin to realize the terrible fate that lay before him. By the time a century had passed, Tithonus would find himself crushed under the unbearable weight of age, his limbs no longer working and his mind having deteriorated, but as much as he wished for death, he knew it would never come. With sadness in her heart, Eos would take Tithonus's fragile body and lock it away in a grand chamber where he would be safe from the outside world. After years had passed and the prince had withered away until he was little more than bones, Eos would transform Tithonus into the first cicada, an insect known for its long lifespan and for making noise during the early hours of dawn when Eos carries out her duties in the sky above.
Hermes. Hermes, the messenger god and patron of thieves, was known as a trickster amongst the gods, often teasing and annoying his fellow divinities. When he came of age, he assumed the role of messenger, traveling with a golden rod as a mark of his authority. Aided by his winged helmet and sandals, he would use them to fly around and deliver messages, frequently traveling between Olympus and the Underworld. Here he would help Hades, acting as a shepherd for the souls of the dead, guiding them as they made their way to the afterlife. Pan. Like the other gods, Hermes was known to father many children with various women, but one of his sons, Pan, the god of nature and fertility, would be born with the features of a satyr, creatures that were part man and part goat. But when he was born, Pan's mother, a nymph named Dryope, was so horrified to see her newborn baby with a pair of horns, a full beard, and hooves that she would run away screaming in terror at the very sight of him. However, Hermes would take his child up to Mount Olympus and introduce him to the rest of the gods, who were so intrigued by the boy's hideous appearance and charmed by his playful attitude that they would soon come to adore him. None would love him more than Dionysus, the god of wine and parties, who would give him the name Pan, meaning all, as he was beloved by all the gods of Olympus. But much like his father, Pan was known for his many affairs with nymphs, the nature deities that inhabited streams and forests across the world. But one nymph by the name of Syrinx would become the object of Pan's affections, with him pursuing her through the marshes where she lived. Terrified of the god, Syrinx would try desperately to escape him, transforming herself into a bed of water reeds when she neared the river's edge. When Pan finally reached the river, he would tear through the marsh trying to uncover the terrified nymph. But as he did so, a strong breeze would blow through the reeds, producing a beautiful melody unlike any he had heard before. Inspired by the sound, Pan would uproot the reeds and bind them together with wax, creating a set of pipes. Sitting down, he would play a tune in the memory of his lost love Syrinx, with the instrument being named the panpipes after its creator, and carried by the god wherever he went. Dionysus. God of wine and parties, Dionysus would have an unusual birth when his mother, Semele, asked Zeus to appear before her in his true form, the sight of which would cause her to die of terror. Taking the infant that was growing inside her, Zeus would place it in his thigh until the baby was fully grown, with Dionysus being born a few months later. Becoming one of the most loved gods in Greece, Dionysus would be seen as a symbol of pleasure, with his followers engaging in mass drinking, crazed dancing, and lovemaking. Known as the Liberator, Dionysus would create a new drink called wine, which helped his followers stem their pain while also bringing them joy and euphoria. King Midas. While he spent much of his time partying, Dionysus was also a generous god, willing to grant mortals their deepest desires. After saving a close friend of Dionysus, King Midas was granted a single wish in thanks. Obsessed with wealth and fortune, Midas asked for his deepest desire, the power to turn anything he touched into gold. Dionysus would grant Midas's wish, with him returning to his palace in joy, touching everything the eye could see. Soon the floors, walls, and even his clothes were gold, with Midas flaunting his wealth to guests from across the kingdom. After displaying his abilities for hours, Midas would become parched, ordering his servants to fetch him some water. However, as the liquid touched his lips, it too would turn to gold. Panicking, he would reach out across the table, but the bread, wine, meat, and fruit would all turn into the precious metal. Nothing he touched could be consumed. Cursing his gift, Midas would begin to cry, with the sound of his sobbing alerting his daughter, who came to console him. But as she touched his hand, her fingers would begin to stiffen. Soon her whole arm was gold, and before long, all that remained was a statue of a little girl reaching out to comfort her father. Mourning for his lost child, Midas would return to Dionysus, begging him to revoke his gift. Pitying the man, Dionysus instructed him to bathe in the river Pactolus, with his golden touch being washed away in the water. Becoming a normal man once again, the story of King Midas would serve as a warning for those who would prioritize wealth above all else.
Demeter. One of the 12 Olympians and the sister of Zeus, Demeter was the goddess of farming, ensuring that the harvest was rich and the land remained fertile. Under her watch, the fields knew no decay, with the earth consumed in an endless spring.
Persephone.
But there was one thing she prized above all else, her daughter Persephone. However, Persephone had another admirer, with Hades taking a keen interest in her. One day, while she was strolling through a meadow, a beautiful flower would bloom before her, a narcissus, something she had never seen before.
But when Persephone reached down to pluck it, the earth would break open and swallow her, with Hades dragging Persephone down to the underworld, where she would be forced to marry him. Distraught at her daughter's disappearance, Demeter would search for 9 days and nights until the sun god Helios revealed her captor's identity. Demeter would lock herself away for an entire year, refusing to return until Persephone was released. But without the goddess of farming, the world entered into a great famine, with the fields turning barren. It was only now, with humanity on the brink of starvation, that Zeus was forced to intervene, ordering Hades to return Persephone to her mother. Although Hades would agree, before she left, he fed Persephone a food of the dead, a single pomegranate seed, binding her to the underworld for eternity. In order to save humanity, Zeus was forced to make a compromise. For 9 months of each year, Persephone would return to live with her mother on Olympus, with Demeter's joy causing nature to bloom across the earth. However, for the final 3 months, Persephone would return to Hades in the underworld, a period we now call winter, with Demeter's grief at the absence of her daughter causing the plants to die and the world to freeze over. And so it was that the seasons began.